Oh, yes, of course. I'm just going to start saying hello to everybody. Thank you to this on Zoom and also on YouTube. So happy to have you with Temple Beth Tikvah on this Shabbat morning of President's Day. And also, Parashat Mishpatim has been designated as something called Repro Shabbat, which is a Shabbat to sort of support women in their need for reproductive choice. And the reason for this Shabbat being that Shabbat is because it is this in this particular parsha with its 53 laws, many of which kind of don't seem to necessarily have a cohesive structure, although you can sort of figure out a couple of them. And what happens if they lose a pregnancy, etc. So this is why the National Council of Jewish Women has sort of dedicated this Sabbath annually to talk about those issues. And so glad to be here with my colleague, Rabbi Daniel Levine.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Shabbat Shalom. And we have Evan Griffin on piano. And I'm so excited. The Kol Tikvah Choir singing with us this morning. And in fact, we're going to open with a new song that we are going to share with you this morning. I want to invite you to turn in your books to page 196. And just to say that, you know, I love the idea that every day is a new song unto God. And in the Psalms that we sing on Friday evening, many times we say, Shiru Ladonai Shir Chadash, Ki Niflaot Kol Haaretz, sing a new song to God for all the wonders of the world. Though that phrase appears a lot, and this morning's melody, written by my teacher, Cantor Lawrence A., is taken from the text of Isaiah 42, verse 10. And I want to invite our choir to lead us in our opening melody. Thank you.
Shiru, 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 Ladonai. Shiru, 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 shir chadash. Tehilato mikzei haaretz, shiru Ladonai. Tehilato mikzei haaretz, shiru Ladonai. Shiru Ladonai, shir chadash. Tehilato mikzei haaretz, shiru. Shiru Adonai Shir Chadash, Tehilato mikzei haaretz, Shiru. Yodaya umlo, imim beyoshveihem. Yodaya umlo, imim beyoshveihem. Shiru, 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 Ladonai. Shiru, 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 shir chadash. Tehilato mikzei haaretz, shiru Ladonai. Tehilato mikzei haaretz, shiru Ladonai. Shiru Ladonai, shir chadash. Tehilato mikzei haaretz, shiru. Shiru Ladonai Shir Chadash, Tehilato mikzei haaretz, Shiru, 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 Ladonai.
Thank you. First time, that was a Shehechianu moment for our choir, the first time we sang that, hopefully the first of many. And continue on page 196 with Elohai Neshama. Please join me. Elohai Neshama Shenatata Bi Tehorahi. Elohai Neshama Shenatata Bi Tehorahi. Elohai Neshama Shenatata Bi Tehorahi, Tehorahi. Elohai Neshama Shenatata Bi Tehorahi. Elohai Neshama Shenatata Bi Tehorahi. Elohai Neshama Shenatata Bi Tehorahi, Tehorahi. We read together on page 196 at the bottom. My God, the soul you have given me is pure. You created it, you shaped it, you breathed it into me, and you protect it within me. For as long as my soul is within me, I offer thanks to you, Adonai, my God, and God of my ancestors, source of all creation, sovereign of all souls. Praised are you, Adonai, in whose hand is every living soul and the breath of humankind. Baruch atah Adonai, asher biyado nefesh kol chai, v'ruach kol basar ish.
Amen.
We continue with the morning blessings on page 198, and Daniel and I will go back and forth, and every time a blessing is said, your opportunity to say Amen sort of brings you into the fold. It's as if you've said the bracha yourself. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan l'sech vivina lahavchin ben yom uven laila.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam pokeach ivrim.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam who frees the captive.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam who lifts up the fallen.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam rokah haaretz al hamayim.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamechin metzadei gaver.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam malbi sharumim.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hanoten liya'ef koach.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam who removes sleep from the eyes and slumber from the eyelids.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam who has made me in the image of God.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam who has made me a free person.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'asani Yisrael.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam ozer Yisrael bigvura.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam oter Yisrael betifara.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav etzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of the universe, who hallows us with mitzvot, commanding us to engage with words of Torah, which is, of course, all of our daily prayers have their roots in the scripture that informs them. Some of the poetry was created by sages of later times, but when Rabbi Daniel is here, you can always be sure that you will be engaging with some pretty serious words of Torah, I'm happy to say. We are going to continue on page 212 with Baruch She'amar. I'm going to do my best to do this, okay? Okay. Die, 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 die. Die, 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 die. Die, die, die. Yada, die, 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 die. Yada, die, 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 die. Shamar V'haya Ha'olam Baruch Hu Baruch Shemo Baruch Oseh V'Reshit Baruch Omer Oseh Baruch Ozer Umekayem Baruch Merachem Al Haaretz Baruch Merachem Al Habriot Baruch Meshalem Sachar Tov L'Reav Baruch Chai La'ad V'Kayam La'Netzach Baruch Bodeh U'Matzil Baruch Hu Baruch Shemo Yadadai-dai-dai 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 Yadadai-dai.
With songs of praise, we extol you and proclaim your sovereignty, for you are the source of life in the universe. One God, life of the universe, praised and glorious ruler. Your name is eternal. Baruch atah
Adonai Melech Mehulal Batishbachot. We continue on page Psalm 92 with Psalm for Shabbat. Mizmor Shir Leyom HaShabbat Tov Le'Adonai Mizmor Shir Leyom HaShabbat Ulezamer L'Shima Elyon Lehagid Baboker Chasecha Ve'munatcha Baleilot Alei Asor Va'alei Navel Gayon Bechinor Mizmor Shir Leyom HaShabbat Tov Lehodot L'Adonai Mizmor Shir Leyom HaShabbat Ulezamer L'Shimcha Elyon Ki Simachtani Adonai B'folecha B'maseh Yadecha Aranein Magadlu Masecha Adonai Me'oram Kumachshavotecha Yai dai 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 Yai dai 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 Yai dai 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 Yai dai 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 Yai dai 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 Od yenuvun b'seva D'shenim v'rananim hiyu Lahagid ki asher Adonai Tzuri v'lo avlatabo. So I just want to pause, get right into the Ashrei on page 215 to say, Tammy, welcome back. It's so nice to see you. It's wonderful. And Henry, so good to see you here with us and looking fabulous. I hope in great health. And Shabbat Shalom to everyone who hasn't been here in a while and to new faces. So glad you're joining us. I'm Rabbi Marcia Tilchin. This is my colleague, Rabbi Daniel Levine. Evan is joining us on piano, and we have our choir with us today. We're going to do Ashrei antiphonally. Did you like how we did it last week? Do you want to say?
I also learned a new word, antiphonally.
Antiphonally.
Antiphonally. There we go.
Okay.
I almost learned it.
Okay. No, that's you're getting it. So how you want to switch it up this week? You start, and then we'll go back and forth. Okay. So it's like you, them, me, them, you, them. How's that?
Which tune are we doing?
Whatever one you want to do. I only, I know Ashrei Oshveve.
Okay. Ashrei Ashrei Betecha Od Yalelucha Selah.
Ashrei ha'am shekacha lo. Ashrei ha'am she'Adonai Elohav. Tehillah leDavid. Aromimacha Elohai hamelech. Va'avarcha shimcha le'olam va'ed. Bechol yom avarchecha, v'halala shimcha le'olam va'ed.
Gadol Adonai u'me'olam me'od, gilitu lato ein cheker.
Dor ledor yishabach ma'asecha, ugvurotecha yagidu, hadar od hodecha, v'divrei niflaotecha asicha, vezuz garotecha yomeru, ugdulatecha asaprena.
Zecher rav tuvcha yabiu, vetzidkacha yiranenu.
Chanun v'rachum Adonai, erech apai mugdol chesed, tov Adonai lakol, v'rachamav al kol ma'asav.
Yaducha Adonai kol masacha, v'chasidecha yevarchucha, kevod malchutcha yomeru, ugvratecha yedaberu.
Hodia Adam gevurotav, uchvod hadar malchuto, malchutecha malchut kol olamim, umemshaltecha bechol dor vador.
Somech Adonai lechol hanoflim, vezokef lechol hakfufim, enei koel yisaberu, v'ata noten lahem et achlem be'ito.
Poteach et yadecha, umaspia lechol chai ratzon, tzadik Adonai bechol dor, chasid bechol ma'asav, karov Adonai lechol korav, lechol asher yikra'u v'emet.
Ratzon yirayav ya'aseh, v'et shavatam yishma v'yoshiem.
Shomer Adonai et kol ohavav, v'et kol harishayim yashmid. Tehilat Adonai yedaber pi, v'varech kol basar shem kodsho le'olam va'ed, v'anachnu nevarech ya, me'ata v'yad olam, hallelujah. So last week I taught you, we did a Psalm 150, and I probably won't be leading again for a while to be able to do this. Force it. I'd love to teach it to the choir. It's like a march, and it goes like this. If you remember last week, please join in, and I think you'll be able to pick it up. We begin with the chorus. Kol haneshama tehalel ya, hallelujah. Kol haneshama tehalel ya, hallelujah. Let's do it again. Kol haneshama tehalel ya, hallelujah. Kol haneshama tehalel ya, hallelujah. Then the verses go. Hallelujah, el bikocho, hallelujah, birki azol, hallelujah, big vurotav, hallelujah, kirov good low. Everybody now. Kol haneshama tehalel ya, hallelujah. Kol haneshama tehalel ya, hallelujah. Hallelujah, b'teka shofar, hallelujah, b'neva v'chinor, hallelujah, b'tov u'machol, hallelujah, b'mini ve'ugav. Kol haneshama tehalel ya, hallelujah. Kol haneshama tehalel ya, hallelujah. Hallelujah, b'tziltzalei shama, hallelujah, b'tziltzalei truah. Kol haneshama tehalel ya, hallelujah. Last time. Kol haneshama tehalel ya, hallelujah. Kol haneshama tehalel ya, hallelujah. Great. We continue on page 219. Sing with me this chant. Nishmat kol chai, tevarech et shema. Nishmat kol chai, tevarech et shemcha. Everybody keep singing that. Nishmat kol chai, Tivarech Shimcha. Nishmat kol chai, Tivarech et Shimcha. Keep carrying it for me. The breath of all life blesses you. Life blesses you. The breath of all life blesses you. All life blesses you. Nishmat kol chai, Tivarech et Shimcha. Nishmat kol chai, Tivarech et Shimcha. We continue with, at the very top of page 222. Ha'el b'tatzumut uzecha, ha'gibor lanetzach, v'hanora b'norotecha, ha'melech ha'yoshev, al kisei we sing together. Shochenat marom v'kadosh shemo v'chaturam v'yesharim navatehila b'fi
Sharim titala u'b'divrei tzadikim titparach
ובלשון חסידים תתרומם, ובקרב קדושים תתקדש, ובמקלות רבבות עמך בית ישראל, ברינה יתפאר שמך מלכנו בכל דור ודור. Of 223, ישתבח שמך לעד מלכנו, האל המלך הגדול והקדוש בשמיים ובארץ, כי לך אדוני אדוני אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו, שיר ושפחה, הלל וזמרה, עוז וממשלה, נצח, גדולה וגבורה, גדולה ותפארת, קדושה ומלכות, ברכות והודות, מעתה ועד עולם, ברוך אתה אדוני. אל מלך גדול ותשבחות, אל ההודות, אדון הנפלאות, הבוחר בשירי זמרה, מלך אלכי העולמים. The Chatzi Kaddish on 224. Yitgadal v'yitgash shebei rabba B'alma divrach tirutei v'yamlich malchutei V'chayechonu v'yomechonu v'chayei dechol beit Yisrael B'hagala v'zman kariv v'imru amen Yehi shmei rabba mevarach le'olam olamei almayah Yitbarach v'yishabach v'yitpar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yithadar v'yitalev v'yitalal shemei dekudesha v'richu la'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechemata da'amiran v'yalma v'imru amen. As a point of note, as the choir gets ready to lead us in the bar, I just want to say that in some synagogues, the custom is to sort of rise at Yishtabach and then remain standing through Chatzi Kaddish into the Baruch Hu. So what you did, Scott, was not wrong. It's just a different custom. seated. We continue on page 228. We read together in English. Praised are you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of the universe, creator of light and darkness, who makes peace and fashions all things. In mercy you illumine the world and those who live upon it. In your goodness you daily renew creation. How numerous are your works, Adonai. In wisdom you formed them all, filling the earth with your creatures. Be praised, Adonai, our God, for the excellent work of your hands, and for the lights you created. May they glorify you. Shine a new light upon Zion, that we may all swiftly merit its radiance. Praised are you, Adonai, creator of all heavenly lights. Baruch atah Adonai, Yotzer HaMe'orot. We continue on page 230, Ahava Rabbah. Please join us, and this is where we'd get a seat in preparation for Shema. Ahava Rabbah Havtanu, Adonai Eloheinu, Chem La'idol V'Teira, Chamalta Aleinu, Avur Avoteinu, Ve'imotenu, Shabbat Shabbat Chuvecha, Avinu Malkeinu, Vatilamdem Chukei Chaim, Kein Techonenu Lamdenu, Avarachaman, Hamrachem Rachem Aleinu, V'tein B'libeinu Lehavin, Lehavinu lahaskil lishmo walilmodu lilamed lishmor velasot ulekayem et kol divrei Talmud Toratecha v'yahava v'ha'erinenu v'toratecha v'dabek libeinu b'mitzvotecha v'yached levavenu li'ahava u'yira et shemecha v'lo nevosh v'lo nikalem v'lo Kodshecha Hagadol v'Hanora Batachnu Nagila v'nismecha b'shuatecha V'havienu l'shalom me'arba kanfot haaretz V'tolichenu komemiyut li'artzenu Ki el poel yeshwotata uvanu v'charta mikol am v'lashon v'keiravtanu l'shimcha Gadol Selah et lehodot lecha uliachedcha b'ahava Baruch atah Adonai habocher b'amo Yisrael b'ahava. Invite you to take a deep breath. Let it out. And in again. And on the out breath, we'll say the Shema. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu please join me together on 234. V'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levavecha u'v'chol nafshecha u'v'chol me'odecha v'hayu advarim ha'ele asher anochi mitzavecha hayom al levavecha v'shinanatam levanecha v'dibarta bam v'shivtecha v'veitecha u'v'lechtecha v'aderech u'v'shokvecha u'v'kumecha u'kshartam liot al yadecha v'hayu letotafot b'neinecha u'chtavtam al mezuzot beitecha u'v'hisharecha. Turn the page, if you will, to 36 and try to chant with me in Hebrew the top paragraph. And every time we say tzitzit, we'll kiss our tzitzit. Vayomer Adonai el Moshe lemor daber el bnei Yisrael v'amarta aleihem v'asu lahem tzitzit al kanfei vigdehem lidorotam v'natanu al tzitzit hakanaf v'til techelet v'hayachem litzitzit ureitem oto uzechartem et kol mitzvot Adonai v'asitem otam taturu acharei levavechem v'acharei nechem asher atem zonim achareihem leman tizkeru va'asitem et kol mitzvotai v'tem kiroshim lelohechem ani Adonai Elohechem asher hotzeiti etchem me'eretz Mitzrayim liot lachem le'elohim ani Adonai Elohechem emet. By the way, that was for my Torah reading class, at least half of whom are in synagogue today, and I want you to know they're doing a fabulous job. Very impressive. We continue on page 238, and I'm going to ask Daniel to lead us in the reading for us this eternal teaching.
For us, this eternal teaching is true and enduring, beloved and precious, awesome, good, and beautiful. The God of the universe is truly our sovereign, the rock of Jacob, our protecting shield. God endures through all generations. God's name persists. God's throne is firm. God's sovereignty and faithfulness lasts forever. God's words live and endure faithfully and precious for eternity. From Egypt you redeemed us, freeing us from bondage. For that your beloved sings praise, exalting you. Your dear ones offered hymns, songs, praise, blessings, and thanksgiving to you, as sovereign, the living and enduring God. High and exalted, great and awesome. God ever humbles the proud, raises the lowly, frees the imprisoned, redeems the afflicted, helps the oppressed, answering our people when we cry out. Praise to God Most High, blessed is God and deserving of blessing. In great joy, Moses, Miriam, and Israel responded with song to you, all of them proclaiming.
And what they are going to proclaim is a new beautiful piece of Micha Mocha that the choir has prepared for us this morning. This is by Jeff Klepper and arranged by Mark Dunn and Jonathan Hall. So that we can sing along. So Evan's going to teach it to us, and then we'll sing with the choir. It's so pretty. By the way, if they love it and they want to do it a second time, maybe we'll even sing it through twice. That way we'll all get to know it. Okay, here we go. So this is Micha Mocha. We're all part of this together. Here we go.
Micha Mocha, my Adonai.
Micha Mocha,
שיבחו גאולים לשמך על שפת הים. יחגו הודו הניחו ואמרו אדוני לעולם הבא אדוני לעולם
I think we should totally do it again. I think, and this time, so the idea is when they sing, when the choir goes, Mi chamocha, then we can repeat, Mi chamocha, ba. It's a little bit antiphonal.
There we go.
Okay, or this is actually more responsive than antiphonal, but okay, here we go. Let's try it again. Everybody.
Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai.
Mi chamocha, ba'elim Adonai.
Mi chamocha nehedar b'kodesh. Nora tehilot osef eleh. Nora tehilot osef eleh. Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai. Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai. Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai. Shira chadasha שיבחו גאולים לשמך על שפת הים. יחגו הודו הניחו ואמרו
Okay, everybody.
אדוני לעולם ועד אדוני לעולם ועד אדוני לעולם Tzor Yisrael, Kuma B'Ezrat Yisrael, Uvdei Chidomecha, Yehuda Yisrael, Go Aleinu, Adonai Tzvaot Shemo, Kedosh Yisrael, Baruch Atah Adonai, Yisrael. And Evan gets out in Adonai Safatai Tivkach. Adonai Safatai Tivkach, Uvia Gitehilatecha. Adonai, open up my lips that my mouth may declare your praise.
On page 244. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu, Velohei Avotenu, Imotenu, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Velohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, Elohei Leah, Ha'el Hagadol, Hagibor V'Hanora, El Elyon, Gomel Chasadim Tovim, V'konei Hakol, V'zocher Chasdei Avot V'imahot, Umevi Geula Livnei V'neihem, L'man Shemo B'Yahava, Melech Ozer U'Moshia U'Magen, Baruch atah Adonai, Magen Avraham V'Ezrat Sarah, Atah Gibor Le'olam Adonai, Mechaye Meitim Atah Rav Lehoshia, Mashiv HaRuach U'Morid HaGashem, Mechalkel Chesed, Mechaye Tim Berachamim Rabim, Noflim Verofei Cholim, Umatir Asurim, Umekayem Emunato Lishenei Afar, Nichamucha HaGevurot, Umido Melach, Melech Meimid Umechayem. Mashiach Yeshua. Ne'eman ata lahachayot metim, Baruch ata Adonai, mechayei hametim. Nekadesh et shimcha ba'olam, כשם שמקדישים אותו בשמי מרום, כך כתוב היה נביאך, וקרא זה אל זה ויאמר, קדוש, 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 אדוני צבאות, מלוא הארץ כבודו. אדיר אדירנו אדוני, אדוננו מאדיר, שמך בכל הארץ, ברוך כבוד אדוני ממקומו. אחד הוא אלוהינו, הוא אבינו, הוא מלכנו, מושיענו והוא ישמיענו, ברחמיו לעיני כל חי. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, ימלוך אדוני לעולם, אלוהייך ציון, לדור ודור. הללויה. לדור ודור נגיד גודלך, ולנצח נצחים קדושתך נקדיש, ושפחך אלוהינו מפינו לא ימוש, לעולם ועד. ברוך אתה אדוני האל הקדוש. Take a moment for silent prayer, beginning on page 250. We're about to enter the Torah service, and there's, as I mentioned at the beginning, some of you came in a little after we started, but wanted to say that first of all, it's President's Day weekend, and for those of you who were here last night, I had a little quiz, a little presidential trivia on, you had to get, every president from George Washington up until now has a favorite thing that they like to eat. I'm sure there are many, but I made a quiz, which, you had to know, which president's favorite food was what. And actually, our luncheon today, which Rabbi Miriam will tell us about, is all based on presidential favorite foods, as Dr. Scott Spitzer will be talking about something about the presidency. I'm not exactly sure what. And but it's also important to say that this is called Repro Shabbat. And certainly everybody should know about this, and I have a feeling that Rabbi Nico talked about this before. Now in its fourth year, the National Council of Jewish Women has designated Shabbat Mishpatim, which is what we're reading today in Torah, as Shabbat dedicated to really studying and thinking about reproductive freedoms and what Judaism has to say about that. And, what's involved. And so Rabbi Daniel's going to weave some of those teachings provided by the National Council of Jewish Women into his Devar Torah, but I have a prayer for reproductive freedom before we enter the Torah service. May we always remember that each person is created in the image of the sacred, endowed with the inherent right to autonomy and respect. May we create a caring and loving community and nation that reveres this dignity in each of us. May we understand our obligations to one another. We are all inherently holy and should be treated as such. May we find within ourselves the collective will to create a just society in which reproductive justice, the holy right to own the personhood of one's own body, to have or not have children, to raise any children in safety and community, is foundational. May we enjoy each other with the strength, resolve, and courage we need as we walk together towards a liberated world. May we always follow the leadership of those most impacted by the harms of reproductive oppression. May we listen and may we learn. May our country become a place of true liberty and justice for all. May our relationships with each other be ones of care and deep respect. May we walk together on the path of community as we work together to ensure truly accessible prenatal care for all. And as Mark comes to lead, to open the ark for us,
362.
we're on page 362. I invite you to rise. Ein kamocha va'Elohim Adonai v'ein k'mafsecha malchutecha malchut kol amim u'memshaltecha b'chol dor v'dor. Adonai melech, Adonai molach, Adonai yimloch le'olam va'ed. Adonai oz le'amo yitein, Adonai yevarech et amo v'shalom. Av harachamim heitiv avirtzoncha et Zion. Tivneh chomot Yerushalayim. Tivneh chomot Yerushalayim. Ki
shiru, 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 Adonai. Shiru, 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 shir chadash. Tehilato mitzvei haaretz, shiru Adonai. Tehilato mitzvei haaretz, shiru Adonai. Shiru Adonai, shir chadash. Tehilato mitzvei haaretz, shiru. Shiru Ladonai Shir Chadash, Tehilato Mitzvei Haaretz, Shiru. Yordei Hayam Umlo, Imi ve'yoshveihem. Yordei Hayam Umlo, Imi ve'yoshveihem. Shiru, 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 Adonai. Shiru, 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 shir chadash. Tehilato mitzvei haaretz, shiru Adonai. Tehilato mitzvei haaretz, shiru Adonai. Shiru Adonai, shir chadash. Tehilato mitzvei haaretz, shiru. Shiru Ladonai Shir Chadash, Tehilato mitzvei haaretz, shiru. Shiru, 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 Ladonai.
You may be seated, everybody. Shabbat Shalom again. Welcome to everybody joining us on Zoom, YouTube, Facebook, and of course here in person. So we are at Parsha Mishpatim this Shabbat. So for those who are counting in our wider story throughout the early parts of our journeying through the desert, last week, Parsha Yitro, we have just received the Torah, the Ten Commandments, a couple other laws. Famously, Parsha Yitro ends up telling us a couple of laws about the temple. It's going to be important later. And then all of a sudden, we switch to this week with Parsha Mishpatim, which just gives array after array of laws. This is actually the hardest week for a variety of reasons, I think, to come up with a Torah study. Not because of a lack of content, but because there is so much content in this week. Every single verse, as I was going through the Parsha earlier this week, was like, this would be great, and this would be great. And quite evidently, the rabbis of the Talmud felt similarly as well, because if we imagine the Talmud has about 2,600 dense pages of legal debate, and probably about a third of them come from this week's Parsha. So if anybody after the 10, 15 minutes of Torah study this morning is not satisfied and wants more discussion about Jewish civil law, come find me and I will introduce you to one of the 100-plus page tractates of Talmud. So we're going to get some sources up, and I want to try to establish some general principles, and then at the end, as Rabbi Marsha said, we'll talk a little bit about the Jewish view on reproductive justice, really trying to start a conversation, right? Not finish it or conclude, and hopefully this can be, again, in our dialogue, not just on this week, but something that is constantly in our thoughts and mouths, especially as our country engages in quite a difficult time vis-a-vis reproductive justice. But our Torah portion this morning opens, right, the first verse of Exodus 21, and it says, and these, right, the Eila HaMishpatim, these are the laws that you are to set out before them. And so again, we've just received the Torah, just received the Decalogue, the Ten Commandments, just received a couple of laws, and our Torah this week obviously never took a 5th grade grammar class where you learn to never start a paragraph with the word and, because our Torah portion this week says, and these are the laws. And so, of course, right, Rashi, being the careful medieval exegete, the careful reader, interpreter that he is, right, all of a sudden, right, something goes off in his head, and he says, well, why is this week's Torah portion starting with and? Why not just these are the laws? And here's what Rashi says. And these are the laws. Whenever a verse says these, the Torah is distinguishing from what stated previously. Whenever the Torah says and these, it is adding to what was stated previously. So Rashi is telling us a general grammar rule, right? Something we probably know if we understand what and means, but he's saying this is a general rule of Torah interpretation, right? If the Torah ever says Eile, right, the word for these in Hebrew, that means new topic, right? That means we're done with the receival of the Torah. We're done with the 10 Commandments. We're done with all that important Sinai stuff. Now, new chapter, right? Here are some civil laws by which to run your society. But from the fact that it says and these, it's adding to what it said. Thus, just as what was stated previously, i.e. the Decalogue is from Sinai, so too Mishpatim were from Sinai. So Rashi tells us that just as if the 10 Commandments and the Torah and what we think to be religious Jewish law, that of course we know is in the realm of religion. But somebody might think, right, as too often happens in history and society, that actually civil law, the treatment of other people, the treatment of other people's property, of monetary law, everything that our parsha deals with, perhaps that's some other realm, right? Perhaps I am religious or I'm Jewish when I walk into synagogue on Shabbat, or if there happens to be a holiday, or when we're dealing with a life cycle event. But the day-to-day, maybe that's something different. Maybe that's a new section of thought. Rashi and the Torah is here to tell us, ve'ele hamishpatim, right? Don't think that you can just as easily separate out this thing that we call religion from this thing that we call ethical values, right? The two have to exist side by side. And then he continues. He says, if this is so, why is this section dealing with civil laws placed immediately after that commanding the making of the altar, right? So just to unpack his question, right? Parsha Yitro ends off by giving us some laws about the altar. And what Rashi's real question is that if this was part of the original values and ethics and laws that Moses got on Sinai, this should come right after the 10 Commandments, right? It should be 10 Commandments, then Mishpatim, right? Why do we have seemingly laws about the altar and the temple in between? And so Rashi tells us to tell you that you should seat the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin was the great Jewish court in the vicinity of the temple. This is an incredible teaching because what Rashi and the Torah seems to be getting at here is an early attempt, from some extent, to a separation of powers in a society, right? It's not healthy to have a society, the Torah is teaching, where all ideas, all values, all laws go through just one institution, right? Don't think that you can go just to the temple or just to study the civic law and you get all the values you need, right? Every day when you walk into the temple, you are passing the civil court, the Sanhedrin, and hopefully that will force you to introspect on the interpersonal values before you go and practice the God to human values. And the opposite is true as well, right? When the judges or when individuals maybe are going to a court case, right? Never probably a pleasant time in people's lives, right? Always involving loss of money or property or something like that. You should have to walk right by the temple. And you should remember that there's a bigger value in our tradition than attempting to just wring out as many resources. And so we have this picture of two different institutions, right? The temple and the Sanhedrin. And this, of course, is something that the Midrash picks up on if we scroll down a little bit more in Shemot Rabbah, where he says the whole Torah depends on justice. That is why the Holy One, blessed be He, gave the civil laws directly after the 10 Commandments, right? So a very, I think, central foundational Jewish idea, right? You can't have Yitro without Mishpatim. You can't have Mishpatim without Yitro. But of course, our Torah goes on, right? It makes things more interesting, and it gives a case that I think is actually very metaphorically telling in terms of the situation and the society Judaism was trying to create. Because if we look at actually the history of the word religion, right? I hope when I don't say that, half the people don't immediately fall asleep. But the history of the word religion is really a last 200-300 year word, right? It was a word that was generally invented by Protestant scholars post-Enlightenment. And what does the word religion mean? Well, it means there's one facet of life and society that's sectioned off from everything else that maybe corresponds to certain theological beliefs, maybe it corresponds to certain actions dictated by theology. But in the ancient world, and especially in Judaism, we have nothing called religion that's separate from the way in which one is supposed to live the rest of their life. And so the Torah goes on to give a very interesting case. It says, right, towards the beginning of our Parsha in Exodus 21:14, if a party schemes against another and kills through treachery, you should take that person from my very altar to be put to death. So a couple things. One of the topics I was actually considering talking about this morning, again, I had a notebook of 15 different potential topics, was Jewish approaches to the death penalty. Maybe that will have to wait until next year, Parsha Mishpatim. But suffice it to say, at least according to Parsha Mishpatim, right, the rabbis and the Talmud, as they do most things in our tradition, endlessly complicate this picture. But suffice it to say, the penalty for murder is the death penalty, right? Again, we can complicate that endlessly later. This is saying you should even take that person from my very altar to be put to death, right? What a stunning picture, right? We have a picture where the assumptions baked into this verse are fascinating. And if you actually look at the way that a lot of ancient societies operated, right? I'm talking about Babylonian, Middle Assyrian, Hittite. All of these societies actually had protections for individuals within religious spheres. What do I mean by that? Well, once you entered into a religious institution, be it a temple, be it, it's a little bit anachronistic, but be it a synagogue, you'd actually, in some sense, be entering a different realm of legality and ethics, to the point where if somebody was under trial, something they could do is actually flee to a religious institution. And so long as they stayed there, quite literally grabbing onto the horns of the altar, the court wouldn't be able to get them, because the court or civic law had no jurisdiction in the religious courts. Here the Torah is basically saying the opposite, right? Both in the literal case and metaphorical, meaning don't think that you can go out, be committing all of this civic harm and interpersonal harm, and don't think that religion is going to bail you out, right? The synagogue is not a place, and religious institutions, and especially the temple, right, the Mishkan or the Beit HaMikdash, those are not the places by which you can be a terrible person 6 days a week and then metaphorically flee to the temple and say, I am so religious, I'm clutching the altar, right, with all of my strength. And the rabbis, of course, take this and go one step further. And if we can scroll down a little bit. So Rashi tells us, even if he is a priest, a Kohen, and he's standing at the altar intending to officiate, you should take him away to die, right? So what's this picture, right? Imagine you have the priest, and he's there, and he's about to run the entire service for the day. And of course, the way in which the service went in the times of both the wandering in the desert and also the temple times is, if you don't have a priest, you don't have a service, right? The priest was the only one who had the ability to sacrifice the animals and start the service. And so imagine this picture. I mean, imagine it in contemporary Judaism. Somebody's getting up, ready to lead the service, right? The priest is about to lead the service for, you can imagine, Yom Kippur, Shabbat, whatever it is. And if that person is not kosher in their day-to-day civil life, right, you don't give them an excuse, right? You don't absolve them from their wrongdoing just because they're about to lead the service, right? In other words, in Judaism, there's no sense by which religious practice, right, or what we think of religious practice, right, as the rabbis say, the ben adam lemakom, right, the between human and God aspect, can never make up for lapses in the interpersonal relationship. And so much of our tradition follows from Mishpatim. You know, usually people, it's funny because a lot of people define Mishpatim as a civil law or civic law, which is true in some sense. But if you actually read through, right, all of the verses in the Parsha, the Torah is quite clear that if you wrong another person, this is not just between two factors. This is actually between three, right? God gets involved. And so to some extent, our Torah drills home this notion that just as, I guess, from some theological perspective, God wants us to be celebrating Shabbat and engaging in services, God also wants us to be great people. And those two things are actually impossible to disconnect. And so we imagine the society, again, we have the court system, we have the temple system. And so I wanted to do just two more sources, just two interesting different tangents. The last one, of course, will be about reproductive justice, but this case is just too interesting to not bring up. And so I want to read this case in the Talmud, and then we will discuss it a little bit. We'll do a couple sources about reproductive access, and hopefully it will leave with sufficiently gray area that everybody will come up and continue the conversation after. And so we learn in Tractate Sanhedrin, again, Sanhedrin is the tractate in Talmud dealing all about the court system. And so Rav Kahana tells us, in a court where all the judges saw fit to convict the defendant in case of capital law, they acquit him, right? So probably the most counterintuitive thing that any court system can legislate, right, if all of the judges, right, in this case there would be 23 judges for capital cases, if all 23 were on team, this person's guilty, convict, case is over, right, the person is acquitted. And so the Talmud is obviously confused by this. So the Gemara asks, what's the reason for this halacha? It is since it is learned as a tradition that suspension of the trial overnight is necessary in order to create a possibility of acquittal. The halacha is that they may not issue the guilty verdict on the same day the evidence was heard, as perhaps over the course of the night, one of the judges will think of a reason to acquit the defendant. And as those judges all saw fit to convict him, they will not see any further possibility to acquit him, because there will not be anyone arguing for such a verdict. Consequently, he cannot be convicted. So two interesting outgrowths of this. One, I went down a sort of academic scholarly rabbit hole yesterday morning. I think, I'm not so sure, I even went to ask ChatGPT if this theory was true. It didn't know. I think this might be the basis in Western society for the right to a lawyer, or the right to representation. Because what the Talmud is saying here basically is if all 23 judges hear the court case and say, well, Scott is for sure guilty, or Leo is for sure guilty, right? That person, by definition of the fact that all the judges immediately see this as guilty, right, has no defense. And there's nobody to try to advocate on their behalf. And especially everything we know about both ancient and modern criminal justice systems, it's very easy to engage in groupthink, right? It's very easy to see correlation as causation, right? We know all of the pitfalls of the modern justice system. Also, the only time in my life I ever engaged in any type of theater was a production of 12 Angry Men in high school. I was one of the minor jurors, but it's always stuck with me, right? The one person who held out that finally was able to convince everybody else. And so on the one hand, right, we learn that people deserve the right to a representation. But I think also taking much more of a step back, right, this is a profound look into how Judaism wants us to view individuals. Meaning if we view somebody as totally evil, that every single person is writing this person off as for sure they're wrong, right, it's always worth taking a second look. And I think, again, the way in which the Torah wants to legislate the justice system is through, exactly as Rabbi Marsha said before, right, this foundational idea of humans created in the image of God runs through everything. And if you think that a person created in the image of God is so evil as to all 23 of us immediately say guilty, right, perhaps we're missing something, or we must be missing something. And this is actually what differentiates Mishpatim this week. I mean, there's endlessly scholarly material on comparing Parsha Mishpatim to, let's say, Hammurabi's code or to Assyrian legal codes. And what's unique about the Torah is not quantitative. Right? We can endlessly take Hammurabi's code and Parsha Mishpatim and line it up, and that was another one of my 15 things on the list. But suffice it to say that the main difference is qualitative. That the Torah is starting off with the premise that all humans have value. All humans are created in the image of God. And so if you're setting up a system of justice, you're setting up a civil system, a religious system, institutions, right? Make sure you're thinking of every single individual as an individual, and not just as a statistic, as a stereotype, as whatever you might imagine in the ancient world was their status on some made-up hierarchy. And I think this gets us into a conversation about Repro Shabbat quite well, just to maybe go over one or two of the sources that we can do in a minute. But the Jewish approach to abortion / the pro-life, pro-choice argument is one, of course, almost always depending on the individual. I mean, Jewish law almost never works in terms of blanket statements. And there's actually an irony in the history of Jewish law. This is something I teach in my UCI class when we talk about halachic literature. There's a great irony of Jewish legal literature, which is every couple of generations, a great big shot rabbi will get up. They will say, you know what, I'm going to write the code of Jewish law, and I'm going to solve all the problems, right? So whether it's Maimonides writing the Mishnah Torah, Rabbi Yitzhak Alfasi, right, the Moroccan rabbi writing the Rif, whether it's Joseph Cairo writing the Shulchan Aruch, or, you know, more modern versions, right? This is the final book, right? I've solved all conflict that people can ever have. And then the irony is, the second it goes off the press, there's already 6 commentaries lining the outside of the book, all disagreeing and saying, well, what about this case? What about this case? What about this case? And so on the one hand, no blanket rule or even legislation from an outside entity really works for Judaism. And just so we're aware, there's a lot of really interesting lawsuits happening right now, actually by rabbis in plenty of states, Texas, Florida, just to name a couple, that are actually suing the government over religious freedom. Because again, we don't really have time to get into a full discussion of the nuance of Jewish view on abortion, but suffice it to say that blocking abortion access does infringe on Jewish religious freedom. Because Judaism, one, always acknowledges the health of the individual before virtually anything else. I mean, this is true whether we're talking about fasting on Yom Kippur, or this is true whether or not we're talking about carrying a fetus out to term. Any potential hazard to the mother, right, is seen by definition as not just you can, you have to, which is where the lawsuit comes about. And of course, right, Jewish sources always come with more nuance, and so there's plenty of conversation, and again, happy to share more particular sources with anybody here, but questions all throughout the Middle Ages, all throughout early modernity, again, long before any Western countries were really thinking about this, of, okay, well, where is that line, right? Perhaps, as one 18th century rabbi writes, if the baby is going to be born with a high percentage of Tay-Sachs, right, the Tzitz Eliezer Waldenberg in the 1800s writes, well, that can be cause for abortion. What about mental health concerns, right? Well, we know in Judaism, the Talmud is full of the idea that causing pain to somebody, embarrassing somebody, is equivalent to murdering them, according to one rabbi in the Talmud. And so other rabbis, right, will say, right, again, this is not 2 weeks ago on Twitter, this is hundreds of years ago, say, well, yes, any serious hurt to the mental health, or even if it will be a difficult or public embarrassment, as the language was in the 1800s, right, perhaps that can open up a conversation. And this is all gotten from, again, the primary source, and this will be the last thing we do, and happy to follow up with anybody else, that comes towards the beginning of this week's Parsha also, which starts, V'chi yenatzu anashim, right, so if two men, right, here this Sephardi's interpretation says 2 parties, but I think it's actually, it's interesting that I think the language here is gendered, right? So if 2 men are fighting, right, they're causing problems for themselves and maybe society. V'nivgafu ish hara, right, or hara, right? And one of them accidentally bumps into a pregnant woman and a miscarries, receives, no other damage ensues. The one responsible shall be fined according to the woman's husband may exact. The payment may be based on reckoning, but if other disaster ensues, the penalty shall be life for life. So this is the Jewish source, by the way. If anybody is curious, right, there's, of course, endless commentary on this, but this is the source. This is why this week is Reproach Shabbat, because the Torah, from everything we know about the Torah in Mishpatim, it's that human life is paramount. And what the Torah happens to be saying here is if somebody accidentally causes somebody to miscarriage, that is not considered a murder from the Torah's point of view. Now, interestingly enough, there was some incorrect interpretations in antiquity. The Torah was famously interpreted into Greek in the Septuagint, and they actually mistranslated this as, right, this is a whole other rabbit hole. But suffice it to say, again, the Jewish view of reproductive justice follows from everything we've been talking about today, right? The idea that reproductive justice is not to be thought of as a different sphere of activity than what we're doing here in synagogue, right? It's not that we have Jewish synagogue views and then there happens to be Jewish reproductive Shabbat and okay, let's see if we can somehow connect those, right? From the Torah's concern and the fact that Mishpatim comes right after Yitro and the fact that the Sanhedrin and the temple have to be right next to each other, and from the fact that you're not allowed to run into a synagogue and grab onto the Torah and say, look at how religious I am, right? Who cares what I'm doing the rest of the week, right? All of these ideas go into the fact that the individual is paramount, and really what our tradition is trying to do is increase justice for everybody in society, including and especially when they are under attack from wider societal pressures. So Shabbat Shalom, more than happy to continue the conversation, and we'll talk at lunch.
we go. So Shabbat Shalom. Going back for just a split second to Rabbi Daniel's connection between the holy and the civil, we happen to have 8 temple presidents in our congregation this morning on President's Weekend. And so, how's that?
That's so cool.
It's very cool. I don't know if there are many other synagogues that have such active past presidents and presidents as we have. And so we are going to be honoring our past presidents and current president as well with the Aliyot this morning, among others. And I actually went out there and I counted which number each of them is so that you can know. We know.
How many presidents has the congregation had altogether, including
28.
28? So not as many as the United States of America.
Well, the president in the United States of America had a head start.
Yes, they did. That's true.
So if you go back to, I don't remember, 1964 when we were founded, I believe was that Nixon? I don't know which number he was. Johnson, oh yeah, Johnson. So which number was he? 30-something. Okay. There was a TV show, I think. 30-something. Anyway, we will be calling our...
It was 36. What a Jewish number.
Double high.
Yeah.
How's that? And we're now at 46.
We're at 46.
So
Oh my
36
God,
to...
they're doing much better here. They have many more presidents since then.
All right. So we are Parashat Mishpatim, Exodus chapter 21, verse 1. And that would be on page 513. We're only 100 short of the number of mitzvot, but 513 is a good number as well. So for the first aliyah, Yahamdu, Herschel ben Avraham HaKohen, Chaim Yosef ben Tzvi v'Yafa, and Tzidel Rivka bat Shmuel v'Leah. Henry Cohen, president number 25. Tony Roberts, still important. And Lila Pesner, president number 18, a very good number. And reading is Mark Filowitz, president number 14.
Baruch hu et Adonai hamvarach.
Baruch Adonai Ambarach Le'olam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai hamvarach le'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bacha banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et torto. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Ve'eleh mishpatim asher ta'ashim lifnechem ki tiknei evet ivri sheishanim ya'avod u'afitit yetzeh l'chafshi chinam im begapo yavo begapo ya'etzer yetzeh im be'al isahu v'yatza ishto imo im hadonav yeten lo isha v'yalda lo vanim o vanot ha'isha v'ladeta tiyeh ladonecha v'hu yetzeh v'gapo v'im amor yomar eved ahavti et adni et ishti v'et pono lo eitzeh hifshi v'hikshiyo Adonav el Elohim v'hiksho el hadela o al mezuzah v'ra Adonai ve'et atzro v'martzeh avdo la'olam.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torah emet v'chayei olam nota b'tochenu Baruch atah Adonai notein haTorah.
Amen. Yasher Koach. For the second aliyah, Yamdu, Michael ben Yerachmiel v'Nacha, Yekasiel Gavriel ben Baruch Halevi v'Tzirolea Nechuma. Mike Bell, our current president, number 28, and Steve Belasco, president number 19. Chanting Torah will be Rabbi Daniel Levine.
We are on verses, it'll be 7 through 11.
Baruch hu et Adonai havarach.
Baruch Adonai Amvorach Le'olam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai havarach le'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai notein haTorah.
Amen.
Amen. V'chim chor ish et bito le'ama lo tetzei ketzet avadihim im ra'a b'nei Adoneha asher le'yoda hafta le'am nachri lo yimshal lemacharaha b'vigda ba v'im lemido yadena k'mishpat habenot ya'aseh laha im acheret yikach lo she'ara kisuta v'onata lo yigaraha v'im shalosh eile lo yaseh la v'yetzei chinam in kesef.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torah emet v'chayei olam nata b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai notein haTorah.
Amen. Yasher Koach.
Do I get some more presidents?
Yes, you do.
Okay.
You get more presidents. You start right down
Okay.
there.
Oh. Okay.
Okay. For the third aliyah, Yamdu, Gitman Gedalia ben Chaim, Odel Esther bat Moshe v'Chaya, Moshe Rachmiel ben Avraham, Greg Weitzman, president number, where is he? 21. Elise Kirshen, president number 15. Mitchell Goldberg, president number 13.
It's incredible. I can't believe it.
Chanting Torah will be Rabbi Marcia Tilton.
Baruch hu et Adonai havarach.
Baruch Adonai Baruch Le'olam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai havarach le'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai notein haTorah.
Amen. Makeish umet mot yumat ve'asher lo tzada v'ha Elohim ina liado v'samti lecha makom asher yanus shama v'chi yazid ish al re'ehu lehargo. V'chi yazid ish al re'ehu lehargo ve'orma me'im mizbechi tikachenu amud umakeh aviv ve'imo mot yumad ve'ginav ve'gonev ish ve'gonev ish umochro v'nimsa biyado mot yumad u'mekalel aviv ve'imo mot yumad v'chi yirivun anashim v'hika ish et re'ehu ba'even o be'egrof v'lo yamud nafal
ולא ימות ונפל למשכב, אם יקום התהלך בחוץ על משענתו ונקה המכה, רק שבטו ייתן וריפו ירפא.
Lots of laws.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lanu Torah emet, v'chayei olam nata b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai, noten haTorah.
Yasher Koach. I feel we need to be like da 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 da. Yasher Koach. Well, we're going to do a Misha Barak, so you can do that. You can absolutely do that.
Yeah, I'll just put
Okay. All right. So we're going to do a Misha Barak. I want to invite everyone who has the name of a loved one to include to rise. So this week, our congregation is thinking about and sending healing wishes to Alan Boyarsky, Andrea Goldberg, Anita Muchnikoff, Barbara Bevins, Barbara Rothbart, Dale Scully, David Trackman, Ed Schechter, Elaine Solomon, Evelyn Ma, Florence Nagler, Jerry Feldman, Henry Cohen, Janet Capps, Janet White, Jerry Harmon, Karen Guth, Marilyn Gwastoff, Marlene Pfaff, Michael Hennig, Mindy Gladstein, Peter Gwastoff, Rabbi Emmanuel Ben David, Rose Kaufman, Sheldon Weisbach, Shirley Zaidman, and Zach Pesner. And I want to invite other people to add names. I'm thinking about Nikki Cowan and any others. Please join me in this prayer for healing. Oh, and are there names included on the? Okay. Please join me on 371.
And let us say, Amen.
Refuah Shlema Lekulam. And now, a Hagba in the house. Okay, I invite you to rise as the Torah is lifted by President number 19, sorry. V'zot HaTorah asher sam Moshe lifnei b'nei Yisrael al pi Adonai b'yad Moshe. Al Devarim, al Shlosha Devarim, al Shlosha Devarim, Olam, Omed, al Shlosha Devarim, al Shlosha Devarim, al Shlosha Devarim, Olam, Omed. Yahallelu et Shem Adonai, ki nitav Shemo levado, hodo al eretz v'shamayim, vayarem keren li'amo, tila lecho chasidav, livnei Yisrael am karovo. Hallelujah, hallelujah. For I have given you good instruction, do not abandon my Torah. And now remain standing on page 586. Aleinu l'shabeach l'Adon hakol, l'teinu l'aliyoseh reshit, shelo asanu kigoyei haratzon, v'lo samanu k'mishpechot hadama, shelo sam chelkeinu kahem, v'gor aleinu k'cho hamonam, v'anachnu korim u'mishtachavim u'modim lifnei melech malchei hamlachim hakadosh baruch hu. 588. Shehu noteh shamayim v'yosei haaretz u'moshav yikarev b'shamayim imahal u'shlinatu zo v'govei meromim hu Eloheinu einot emet malkeinu efes zulato kakatu v'torato v'yadat hayom v'yadat
ata yom v'hashevota el levavecha ki Adonai hu Elohim b'shamayim imal v'yal haaretz mitachat einod kakatu b'toratecha Adonai yimloch leolam va'ed v'nemar v'haya Adonai lemelech al kol haaretz bayom hahu yiyeh Adonai echad u'shemo You may be seated. I just want to acknowledge, as we get prepared to remember the Yort sites in the community week, I'm not saying I'm a loose woman, but I do get around town, and I've been in a lot of communities, and it is very unusual to see so many presidents engaged in the community in an ongoing way, and certainly with the ritual. I mean, a lot of our presidents are the ones that come here for services, and that is such a beautiful thing and very distinctive about this special community. So just letting you all there in TV land know, or in computer land, that's one of the great precious things about Temple Beth Tikvah. Is there anybody in the room who is in their week of Shiva? Anybody still in Shaloshim? For anybody? Anybody in their current year of mourning? Michael, will you say? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And is there anybody online in their year of mourning?
Yuhazo, and for Shiva, James Edward Millard and Sandy Richmond.
Thank you so much. And I'm remembering Mark Olin in his 30 days, a Ukrainian survivor who was in this country for a long time. For Yort sites, we're remembering Molly Goldman, Karen Bloom Niver, Gerald Rosen, Badan Slavin, Jimmy Gruber, Martin Rubin, Samuel Danto, Carmine Veccarino, Joseph Zills, Mina Zuckerman, Merton Cohen, Shirley Shapiro, Vandana Sandowski, Charles Pike, Samuel Rosenthal, Gloria Edrich, Hyman Weissman, Fatola Nejat Bina, Charles Pike, Samuel Rosenthal, Howard Goldman, Rose Cates, and Hyman Weinberg. And I'll just say, yes, go ahead. And anybody, any other Yort sites to acknowledge? Yes, okay. And thank you. And my mother's Yort site will be observed beginning a week from tonight, so I'm just going to mention Shendel Bat Chaya Malka Baruch HaKohen Jeanette Tilchin. Please, those of us who are remembering loved ones, please join me in the Mourner's Kaddish on 598. Yitgadal v'yitkadash Shemei Rabbah v'alma divra kirute v'amlich malchute v'chayechon u'v'yomechon u'v'chaye dechol beit Yisrael ba'agala u'vizman kari v'imru amen Yehei Shmei Rabbah mevorach le'olam u'almei almaya yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitalev v'yitalal shemei dekudasha barichu le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechemata da'amiran b'yalma v'imru amen Yehi Shlama Rabba Min Shemaya, V'chaim V'al Kol Yisrael, V'imru Amen, Oseh Shalom Mav, Hu Yaseh Shalom V'al Kol Yisrael, V'imru Amen. So be seated quickly. I want to get us into lunch so that we can enjoy our presidential delicacies and also listen to Scott, who has some words to share. This won't be on Zoom, but I think you'll be able to, it'll be live streamed on the TBT live stream for those of you who are with us on Zoom and already on live stream. So we hope you'll join us in about 15 minutes. Scott will start speaking. Choir rehearsal is today. This is the only time I think this will happen, but you will be across the way because the Purim Spiel rehearsal is rehearsing in here this afternoon because Purim is coming. March 8th, we're going to be observing it here at Temple Beth Tikvah. If you've noticed the beautiful decorations, this wasn't because Daniel got married about a year ago or whatever. It was because we're having a big play here. The rest of the set is going up this week. It's Imagine, and we heard a little teaser last night at synagogue, and I hope you'll all be able to join us. Very cute, and hopefully a program that we can grow. And it's Elizabeth Kent who's directing, so I know it's old home week for you, isn't it, Leo? So glad you're here. The Purim Spiel is going to be great, Megillah of Oz, and you want to say a word about the class you're teaching on the Book of Esther?
Sure. I'll also do the teen. For anybody, we are starting a new teen program, Teens and Torah. There we go. Needs to be an alliteration. If you have a teenager, and we are very liberally defining teenager, 12 through 18, join us at Boba Time this week in downtown Fullerton at 7 p.m. for some Torah and tea. And then on March 2nd on 1 p.m., so Thursday 1 p.m. on Zoom, we're going to be doing some pre-Purim studying together. The class is titled The Attempted Canceling of the Book of Esther. You have to join to figure out why that is a title and why the Book of Esther was attempted to be canceled in the ancient Jewish community.
Like an ancient Jewish cancel culture?
Yes.
Holy
like
cow.
they tried to erase it from the Tanakh, but we
Didn't work.
still have it.
Okay, well, I'm excited to take that class. Anyway, Mark, am I missing anything? I'm sorry. By the way, I just want to say, Daniel, what was supposed to be 10 weeks of Jewish history is now 20. It's so fabulous. A lot of you are here. A lot of in this room are on the class. I was able to sit in last week. I'm telling you, there is no university course in the world that is good as what you're doing. And so please join in. And it's actually, if you missed the... Okay, and yes, and if you missed the last class, all the other ones are recorded and you can watch them. And it's like sort of great courses by the great courses, but it's with Daniel Levine. So thank you so much for honoring us with your scholarship. And we're going to close with a song that just, because it's President, Oh Beautiful for Spacious Guys. Here we go. Please rise. Oh, beautiful for spacious skies, forever wave of grain, the purple mountains' majesties above the fruited plain. America, America, God shed her grace on thee, and crown thy good with brotherhood, from sea to shining sea. Shabbat Shalom. And thank you to all that prepared this beautiful lunch. Please don't miss it. We'll see you right in there. Thank you, Evan. Thank you, choir. Thank you, Aiden. Thank you, Daniel. To our Shamashim.
send you live.
Fell off.
I'm coughing, but it's asthma. I'm not contagious. This is my wonderful time of the year.
You're back. How was it? Was it everything? So much. Okay.
I wasn't kidding when I
Yeah, she's there now. Hi, are you Tammy?
What are you doing these days?
I'm a junior in college
Where?
at National University. It's on
Oh, okay.
full time.
Nice. Where is it? Very nice. Good for you.
And I just left Young.
Did you know that Avi,
Yeah.
he's working at, yeah. Time work,
Yeah.
yeah.
For what I didn't feel appreciated.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Well, that's not good.
So,
Yeah, you don't want to work
Yeah.
something like your work is not. It's well, that's kind of cool that you're so you want to be. Is that what you're going to do? Is try to get a teaching certificate actually?
yeah.
Very cool. Important thing to do. Intro to Judaism is they do it online only, but I'd much rather have you to just connect you with. Do you have a syllabus and all that stuff? Yeah. Yes, he does. We'll see. Kind of. Sort of, maybe.
Do you know the approximate runtime of your talk?
About 30 minutes.
Okay,
Maybe a little less.
okay, cool. I just need to let
I'm
the
gonna
choir
try to go
know.
fast.
Oh no, don't rush at all. I just need to let the choir know what time.
But I don't want to. Okay. All right.
Shabbat Shalom. I want to thank Greg and Miriam for this beautiful lunch. And I just wanted to introduce someone I know very well. And this is Scott Spitzer. He's a professor at Cal State University Fullerton in the political science department. And among his areas of expertise he's in American politics sort of broadly, the presidency, media and politics. He's taught a lot of other things, but you can imagine just sort of with what the world has looked like in the last 10 years, it's been very interesting to be in Scott's field. And last year on President's Day, I was doing a Zoom service, he did a little teaching and people really enjoyed it. So I thought it would be nice if he would share some of things that you probably don't know about presidential scholarship, just because not a lot of us do that. Share with us some of that today. And really in the age of social media and things like that, how a lot of that is changing. So without further ado, Scott Spitzer.
Thank you. I know the rabbi quite well. Thank you, Rabbi Tilchin. So I just, something happened about a month and a half ago. There was a so-called FBI raid on President Trump's Mar-a-Lago mansion to find some documents. You guys probably are familiar with that. Normally, the National Archives and Records Administration does not make national news for days and days at a time. But I was like, that's my purview. I deal with the National Archives all the time, and I wanted to talk to you guys a little bit more in depth about the kind of research that a lot of historians and a lot of political scientists do using presidential archives, and to take you through sort of where we're at in terms of the study of the presidency. Now a lot of political scientists like myself are moving in a direction of trying to do quantitative research on the presidency. It's hard when you only have 45 presidents, 46. So when you have 46 presidents, that's a very small number relative to hundreds and hundreds of members of Congress or millions of votes. But there are a lot of political scientists who are starting to count, use public opinion polling and public approval ratings of presidents and to analyze the capacity of a president to lead public opinion, counting number of speeches and where they make their speeches, doing quantitative coding of presidential speeches and things like that, looking at how successful presidents when presidents are successful with Congress, when they're not successful, trying to account for that kind of stuff. But if you want to study leadership, if you really want to get into why presidents do what they do, not what they do in an observant way, and why they don't choose other kinds of actions, then you need to get to their motivations. It's helpful to, of course, talk to their aides and read the contemporaneous accounts of those, all those books that are coming out about Trump, and there'll be books that'll be about, Biden and all the people who resigned from his cabinet, and, that's all really good. But official documents tell the most accurate story of what's really happening. They tell a lot of the story of a presidency, including the nature of their leadership, how they accomplished what they accomplished, and from my perspective, what's most important is why they chose to do what they did. So a little bit about my personal research agenda as a political scientist. I'm very interested in racial politics, in the way presidents understand their leadership of racial politics in the context of other issues that may not have overtly racial identity. So I've studied welfare politics and anti-poverty for a long time. And one of the things I wanted to understand was how racial politics affected the ways that our presidents have led on welfare reform. And it's very hard, because if you will say that, you know, welfare has a stand-in or has a symbolic racial set of connotations, it's very easy to say, no, it's just, that's just you're just turning this into a racial issue. That's just your perspective. That's subjective observation. And that actually what presidents are doing is thinking about, you know, poverty and about class and about economics and about the role of government. So I wanted to sort of, you know, think about our presidents, like in particular, I was very interested in the 1960s as a period of time when welfare became deeply politically controversial. It's hard to imagine that prior to the 1960s, really prior to the Johnson years, welfare was not that controversial a program. There was not a lot of conflict over welfare in American politics. It started with Kennedy, but really with Johnson and every president through Clinton, when we ended welfare as a national commitment, that welfare became highly politicized. And my contention was that the racial politics of the 1960s had a lot to do with that. Now, how was I going to study that? Well, as I said, you know, if you really want to understand the motivations, the why of presidential leadership, why was President Johnson expanding the war on poverty? Why did he not include a welfare reform as part of his war on poverty? Why did Nixon propose a guaranteed minimum income for all Americans? Why did Reagan cut back on welfare so much? And my supposition was a lot of those choices all of those choices had a great deal to do with the way they saw their leadership on racial politics. So in order to investigate that, I had to go into the presidential archives to see what explicit mentions of race were in their high-level conversations with their aides when they were discussing welfare. Were they talking about welfare in racially neutral terms, or were they actually considering what the influence of their policies might be on white working class Southerners? For example, during Nixon years, Nixon was really interested in expanding the Republican Party at that time, a minority party. The Democrats had the big majority, and one of the big ways he was going to do that was to try to appeal to white Southern conservative Democrats to move to the Republican Party. And his effort was to, one piece of that effort was to use welfare reform as a way to directly reach out to those voters. And there was evidence in the Nixon archives about that. Now, what I want to, so the archives are incredibly important. And prior to Nixon, presidents simply when they left office, they kept their documents, and they decided what to do with them. Most of them brought them home, put them in their own library, and then eventually, you know, they died, and they would deed it over to the Library of Congress. But this was a big problem from time to time, right? Let me give you an example. President Lincoln, our favorite president, his papers were held by his son, Robert Todd, who basically said, I don't want to share any of these papers with any of the journalists who want to write about Lincoln, because I want to protect my father's reputation. And he held on to those for decades and decades. Eventually, he gave it to the Library of Congress in 1919, right? Quite a bit after his father's death. And then he said, you can have this Library of Congress, but you can't let researchers use this for another 21 years after I die. So those Lincoln papers didn't actually open up for historians and political scientists to actually research until 1947. Now, most of that collection's online. It's digitized. It's very accessible. Just a couple of other quick examples. Warren Harding's wife basically burned all his records. Martin Buren basically said, I'll pick these records to turn over and I'll burn all the rest. So the 8th president, and if you're not familiar with Martin Buren, very important. So this is a big problem. FDR was the very first president to say, I'm going to create a library. We're going to build this library, and then we'll have the national, and then we'll turn over, I'll give all my papers, all my official documents over to the public and house them in a presidential library in Hyde Park, New York. Now that set up a model where presidents like FDR, and Hoover was soon after, he says, well, if you have a library, I want to have a library. And all these presidents, they basically raise money through private foundation. They build these presidential libraries, and they give the papers, their official papers, over to the National Archives and Records Administration, the agency that runs the Library of Congress. And most of these libraries are in the president's hometown. And now we have 15 presidential libraries. Now think about it. If you want to go research national politics as a historian or a political scientist, and you want to look at documentation, official documentation, if you want to look at a presidential set of records, you can't go to the Library of Congress and get them if you're looking after, starting with basically FDR on, any modern president. You have to go to their hometown. In order to look at Nixon's record and look at all his 40 million pages of documents that are, 40 million documents, sorry, not 40 million pages, 40 million documents that are in the Nixon Library down the street here, you got to go to Yorba Linda, which to us seems really close. But if you're in Philadelphia or Washington, D.C. or Minnesota, that seems like, how am I ever going to get to Yorba freaking Linda to go do that research? And when I first started doing research on Nixon, the papers weren't there, thank God. I had to go to Texas to go to LBJ's library to research the war on poverty. But if I wanted to go look at Nixon's papers, I could take a train from New York City, where I was in graduate school at Columbia, and go to Washington, D.C., and stay with my brother-in-law, and go research at the National Archives 2, which is a second, not the Library of Congress, but it was in Bethesda, Maryland, and look at the Nixon presidential materials. Now, why was it there? Well, because Nixon was a special guy. A few weeks after resigning the presidency under the cloud of Watergate, which we're all familiar with, Nixon like every other president, had a special arrangement to get his papers, right, they were his, from the General Services Administration. And then he said, I'm going to donate this to a presidential library in Yorba Linda in my hometown. And but I'm going to sign a special deal with Arthur Sampson, who's the administrator of the General Services Administration. And my deal is going to say this: I get to destroy whatever sensitive materials that I think are too sensitive before I put them in the library, including the tapes, right? He was going to, and Congress found out about this. This is a month after he resigns. He's doing this. He's signing this agreement with the GSA administrator. I'm going to destroy the Watergate tapes. So Congress says, we're going to pass a law that prevents you from doing that. This is a Congress that was in no mood to deal with Nixon's antics. So they passed the Presidential Records Management and Public Affairs Act, PRMPA, PRIMPA, in 1974. It affected one president and one president only. And it says, basically, it's the Presidential Recordings and Materials Preservation Act. And it says, the whole point of this, it says this in the preamble, was to protect and preserve the tape recordings of conversations involving former President Nixon made during his tenure as president. All of his papers and all of his tapes had to stay in Washington, D.C. So I got the benefit of that when I was on the East Coast, and I got to go to Washington and do my research for my doctoral dissertation in the Nixon materials. And then shortly, decades later, finally the Nixon family and the Nixon Foundation made a deal with the National Archives and Records Administration that all of the records could be open for research, including the tapes, and that the National Archives would run the materials as they do at all the other presidential libraries. They would manage the materials, including classified documents and things like that. And they could be moved to the Nixon Presidential Library here in Yorba Linda. And so I arrived in 2002 to Tustin when Marcia became a cantor at Congregation B'nai Israel. And then 5 years later, all of the papers followed me to the Nixon Library, and I got to go and do research there. And the very first National Archives and Records Administration librarian at the National Archives at the Nixon Presidential Library was Timothy Naftali. And you may recall that name because he was very controversial. And why was he controversial? Because he opened up more and more tapes and more documents. Literally thousands of hours of tapes that had not been processed yet. He ensured that they would be processed and made available to the public. You can listen to those things online now. And millions, and more importantly from my perspective, millions of pages of documents that had been previously unavailable for research. This is in 2007, right? Nixon resigned in 1974. That's how long it took. Now, a lot of papers were available, but now this was a huge thing. Now, so there's one law that governs Nixon's library and his papers. And then there's another law that was passed in 1978 that basically said anytime, and this is where it gets interesting, you guys. I told you that stuff because that's my inside baseball about my interests. But you know about Trump, right? And the big argument is those are the public's records, right? That's what the case against Trump for holding on to, and by the way, the case against Biden for having documents in his house. Those aren't his documents, those are the United States of America's documents, which means our documents, the public's. And that's because of a law that was passed in 1978, the Presidential Records Act, which started affecting every president starting with Reagan in 1981. Every president starting with Reagan, when they leave office, their papers, all of the documents that they produce as part of their leadership, exercising their constitutional obligations and responsibilities, all of those immediately go to the public. They are the public's documents. And while they're president, they have to catalog them and take care of them, and they have to protect them and make sure that they're not, because they're ours, they're not theirs. So that was passed, and so now we have 3 different legal systems for all of our presidential documents. One from before Nixon, like all these presidents who just was a free-for-all, and most of them donated it to the Library of Congress. So you want to look at George Washington's papers; those are in at the Library of Congress. You want to look at Martin Van Buren's, you got to go to a university, Cumberland University in Tennessee, where his great-grandson gave the papers that were left over to there. And if you want to get Lincoln's papers, you can go online or go to but all of these different libraries did it on their own the way they wanted to, including FDR. But starting with then there was Nixon, separate, and then every president starting with Reagan on. And all of those systems, right, set up basically the same organization, that there's a library that's built with private dollars, museum, and there's the documents which are for the researchers. Now, what's interesting is that there are 2 different missions. The foundations that are behind building these libraries, which raise millions and millions of dollars, what's their interest? They want to make sure that the president that they love looks great in history. You know, if you go to the Presidential Library here in the Nixon Foundation, they see their job as saying, hey, don't forget that Nixon did all these great things. He opened up China, and he established the Environmental Protection Agency, and he employed more women at high levels than any president before him. All these things that every presidential library will celebrate their president's great successes and things that they want to be known for, and downplay the things that they are notorious for. So you don't, now of course, so they're in some ways, they're shrines to these presidents. That is not the mission of the National Archives and Records Administration. They're not out there trying to build myths. They're in the business of history, of accurate, truthful history, and collecting our documents and making those available. So there's clashing, there's oftentimes clashing missions between the National Archives and the museum where they're housed. And that was a really big problem at the Nixon Library, but it's been a problem elsewhere. Now let me just tell you about some of the more recent things. If you wonder about the importance of these documents, let's take a look at recent history. And I told you about, we passed the Presidential Records Act in 1978, and the first president it covered was Reagan. And what it said was that 12 years after the president leaves office, the papers, which are the public's, must be opened for research. And I was all excited because Reagan's papers were going to get opened up, and I wanted to do research on it, and I applied for this big conference at Stanford University with William Brownlee, a historian, was saying, okay, the archives are going to be open, and then anybody wants to propose a paper using Reagan's papers can do that. And I was going to come fly, and I knew Marcia was going to get a job out here. It was a year before we moved here, so I was going to fly out to Simi Valley, go to Simi Valley and do research with the newly opened Reagan archives. And then when George W. Bush was elected, one of the first things he did is he issued an executive order that says, no, you cannot look at any of these documents until the president and his lawyers get a chance to examine each one of them one by one to make sure they're not personal in nature. Personal in nature included political campaigns. That's not constitutional duties of the president, and therefore a president owns those papers that are about his daughter's wedding or, about his political fundraising. Those are his personal papers. So what Bush's executive order said that every single document in the entire collection of the Reagan Library would now go before a bunch of lawyers that the Reagan team would hire to evaluate whether it was personal or political, and they could contest whether it had to be released or not, which meant, of course, that I would never get to see any of this stuff in my lifetime. This is going to take a really, really long time, and I was really disappointed, and I didn't go to that conference. It was canceled. So, but they knew, right? Bush knew that there was stuff in the archives that might affect the way he's going to do, what the kinds of things he wanted to do as president of the United States, because of some of the people that were in the Reagan administration were now hired by him in his administration, right? Not the least of which was Dick Cheney and Don Rumsfeld and people like that, who are also Nixonites as well. So when Barack Obama became president, he rescinded that executive order, and now, right? So an executive order is a unilateral act by a president, which has the force of law under an existing statute. Presidents can interpret those and administer and issue a directive of how those laws should be administered or implemented, and therefore that's the constitutional underpinnings of these executive orders. But from the perspective of a president, the challenging thing about that is any executive order you issue can be undone by the next president, who can issue another executive order, which is exactly what Obama did. He said, no, we're going to go back to the old way. 12 years, it's open for everybody. But what did Obama do? Obama said, I'm going to create a presidential library, except we're not going to have any textual records in my library. None. All of the Obamas, and so we're going to raise a lot of money. We're going to create my private library and museum. The most expensive one, by the way, Obama's raised $500 million. Not quite, $482 million to build his presidential library outside of Chicago. And so there you go, right? He's got this presidential library. No, but National Archives and Records Administration, nope, they're not going to be there. Every other presidential library, you go to the LBJ Library, which I love. They have an amazing presidential library. The National Archives opens up all those papers, manages all those papers and oral histories and all the documents from the years of the Johnson administration, including his conversations and handwritten documents and things like that. Well, that's the National Archives, and the Johnson Foundation runs the museum there, where they really focus on civil rights, and that's their big thing. And Vietnam, there is an exhibit, but that's off to the side. They don't want to highlight that, but there's a lot of stuff on Vietnam there. But here, Obama's basically saying, we're not going to have the National Archives. We will pay money to have all of those documents, those 30 million documents, digitized. And they're in some warehouse far away from his presidential library, being digitized right now. That's what they're being done, right? So if you want to go and research at the Obama Library, if you're a historian or political scientist, you don't have to go there. You can just go online and get the material. So in some ways you might say, oh, that's amazing, that's great. On the other hand, one of the nice things about libraries is they have librarians who help you find things. So if you want to research, what did Obama do with the environmental laws, and where can I find the conversations that he was having with his high-level cabinet officials and lower-level cabinet officials as he was thinking about what he was going to do. What was his motive? If I want to know his motivations, like what he cared about when he was doing environmental law, I would want to look at those documents. How do I find those? I don't know. The finding aid that I'm going to see online, it's just millions and millions of documents. And it's going to box 1, box 2, and they might have subject headings, but these are big, broad subject headings like federal government, FG, or welfare, WE, which is everything that has to do with anything that has to do with poverty. Food stamps, supplemental security income, Medicaid, all under WE. And so, on the one hand, it's great that it's going to be digitized. On the other hand, it's less accessible. And then, of course, we think about Trump and whether there'll be a Trump library. There is going to be a Trump library. Right now, the documents issue is a little iffy. Right? We know that there was 15 boxes of documents. The National Archives is not really happy with the Trump officials. There were 15 boxes of documents that should have been handed over to the National Archives and Records Administration, found in his Mar-a-Lago residence, not to mention others. And of course, we know that Biden, with his vice presidential papers and other kinds of White House documents, found in his Corvette, right? So this may not be the best way to handle our national repository of historical documents, is what I'm trying to say. From the perspective of a scholar, it would be easier for me to fly to Washington, D.C., spend a week, 2 days looking at Reagan's documents in the National Library of Congress, 2 days looking at LBJ's, right? And copying them there, as opposed to flying to Texas, Austin, Texas, and then coming back, and then driving up to Simi Valley and staying overnight at the Holiday Inn in Simi Valley, which was my home for about a week. A couple times I did research there. It would be nice if they were all in the Library of Congress, managed efficiently and securely, in my view, there's my opinion, because you're going to get things like Trump, right? The last time we had that much controversy around documents was Nixon, right? Nixon said, I'm going to destroy these things. I don't know what Trump was planning to do with those 15 boxes of documents and the other classified documents. We don't know, right? So, in our current climate, which is incredibly polarized, obviously, I don't need to tell you that, but think about what that means. That means the facts themselves are often in dispute. What you see is true often depends upon where you sit. Then this is more the case now than at any other time since Lincoln, since Civil War. The historical record's more important now than ever before. And those documents tell a true story. They are what they are. That's what people said. That's what people wrote. That's what people conversed by email now. We can collect those things. So as our political scientists and historians try to think about how are they going to tell the story of the Trump years, we're going to want access to what's going on inside the Trump White House, right? And Bob Woodward's amazing, but I don't want just what Bob Woodward found. I might have other kinds of interests than what Bob Woodward did. And so, of course, a lot of that stuff is going to be electronic records, emails, websites that are going to have to be preserved, right, and not updated and things like that, not to mention Twitter, right, President Trump's tweets. So imagine, 50 years from now, you want to look at those tweets, where are you going to find them? And so how will we tell this story fully and accurately? So I'm going to end by noting that when I teach the presidency in this current political environment, and it's challenging, having students, the way I approach it is, you look at the record. Here are some theoretical approaches that political scientists and historians have taken to understanding the presidency over time. And here's what we think matters when we evaluate the president. Now you borrow some of ours and look at the historical record, and you tell me, Professor Spitzer, what you've learned. A, what did the historical record tell you about Obama, about George W. Bush, versus Theodore Roosevelt, versus, John Adams? What's the difference? What's the similarities? How's the presidency changed? All those kinds of things. The record, it matters that it's reliable. We can come to all sorts of different conclusions analyzing the data, using different approaches. It's up to, but the data has to be dependable. The data, and I say the data, are these historical archives. So it's up to us to demand that our nation be vigilant to protect these documents and make them available for future researchers, not just Professor Spitzer, but my students, who I used to bring to the Nixon Library and have them go into the research room and learn how to do that kind of research, until I realized that a lot of them didn't want to go there. So after a while, I stopped doing that. But I should probably start doing that again, just because I think it's really interesting. So I'll stop with that and answer any question you might have. Yeah.
So all the news reports that came out after the Mar-a-Lago incident was that these were not just documents he shouldn't have taken, but they were classified documents, and I would presume that would mean secret or top secret. That if they were in the access of our enemies, could be used against us. Now, what do you have to say about that?
No, the question was, these were,
I don't think they weren't concerned. Newspapers were not concerned.
Right.
You.
No, they weren't concerned about the National Archives. No, the National Archives was saying, look, there's a law, and you are legally obligated as a president of the United States who's left office to turn over all those documents because they're not yours. You're stealing, right? Now, the fact that some of them were classified documents, right? There are classified documents at the Nixon Library, and I've seen the cases where they're held, national security directives, that we still can't look at because they're so sensitive. about nuclear codes and stuff like that. I have no idea what's in there. But I know that there's stuff that the military said, you can't, we're going to keep it here because all the records have to be next to each other. So the answer to your question is that, yeah, no, the fact that they're among the records, those 15 boxes, were classified materials is very, very upsetting. It's very upsetting because it's dangerous. Yeah, I agree, 100%. Documents are important. Yeah. Those are covered under the presidential, the White House records. So when I say presidential documents, I mean everything that's in the executive branch is collected. All of the administrative documents. So the Attorney General's documents, the Vice President's documents, the Secretary of Defense documents, the National Security, that's all part of the presidential record. And those are the public's records ever since 1978. Before that, think about it. Kind of crazy to think that, Johnson didn't have to turn over all those documents. Those documents got turned over because he wanted to. He wanted to, like FDR wanted to. It was when Nixon said, yeah, I don't want to turn over everything. These tapes are mine, right? That's when we started to pay attention to that. I see that there's something going on here. Okay, thanks for the good question. She's the vice president.